into our series again today, Unorthodox, looking at the way that David's life is not how you think somebody becoming a king and ruling as king would go, and looking at the kind of how that unorthodox way of going about being a king actually shows what God's heart is through everything. Last week, Bryce gave one of the most famous, if not the most famous, story of David's life, which is David and Goliath, where David triumphs over a giant. He brings a gun to a knife fight. He had the slingshot, Goliath had a sword, and though he was bigger, David knew that God was with him. And as we looked at that, we saw that there was more going on to the story, right? That Goliath kind of represented the serpent and God's ultimate victory over evil that we're thankful for. And the strange thing with where we go today is that David's high moment, almost immediately in his story, becomes the reason that everything will change. David has been a warrior, and he will be through some of what we'll look at today. He defeated Goliath. He goes on to command several of the armies of Israel, and he is wildly successful as a commander of the army against the Philistines. And you see that as David is successful as a warrior, he makes another transition. The transition from shepherd to warrior happened as we looked at the Goliath story, but there's another transition already brewing, which is that David goes from being a warrior and celebrated to becoming an outlaw, chased down for his life. And in this transition time, there's one person who will prove the most important. One person who will be the person who sees David through this transition from his celebrated status as warrior to his lowest status as an outlaw. It's a friend who sacrifices his own interests for the sake of David, a friend who will forever define David's life, even when David becomes king. And that person is Jonathan. Jonathan. Today we're going to look at David and Jonathan, their friendship, and what it communicates about God's heart. Jonathan means the Lord is given, and what a gift he is to David through these stories. We actually see Jonathan show up almost immediately. So David and Goliath is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. The very opening of chapter 18 says this: when David had finished speaking to Saul, the king, the soul of Jonathan, who's Saul's son, the son of the king, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let David return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved of David. Now, I want you to pay attention how much that means, right? The son of the king, Jonathan, is saying, I am drawn to you, David, so much. There's instant friendship. Our souls are locked together. Now, they probably knew each other because David was often a guest in Saul's court, playing music. But from that moment on, Jonathan and David would be bound by this deep friendship. And it's defined by Jonathan giving from what was rightfully his as the son of the king to this one who God's chosen. Jonathan recognizing what God is doing and giving. And so things start out so beautifully in that way, but they change so quickly. Because if we picture the scene, King Saul is already getting this disturbing spirit. And he's the king. He has the ultimate authority. So what we start to see happening in these chapters is a ruler clutching onto his power. We see everyone who opposes or resists or is threatening to his power must be done away with by death. This is a ruler who is unpredictable. No one can track what he will feel or do. He often says one thing and then does another, or does that thing and says another, and he's flip-flopping back and forth. No one can track him. This ruler is increasingly relying on his own intuitions and his own anger to fuel him, his own jealousy to determine his actions. This ruler attacks those who would take away his glory, those who would kind of take away from his parade. He attacks them directly. No one at all can question or advise this ruler. People live in constant threat from indiscriminate power abusing them or others. And as I was looking at the story, I said, gosh, that sounds like today. That level of kind of powerlessness that as a people you're left with. That indiscriminate ruler doing whatever they want to do. See, it's an important principle in all of David's life. We'll see it over and over and over and over and over again. No one should lose their life because a ruler wants to show off power. No one should lose their life because of political realities. We see it over and over again in David's life. He will grieve over and over and over again those who are killed because of political realities. He will get angry at others who kill people because of political realities. And this is important for understanding the heart of God. I mean, this is why we read the Bible. It's not because they're cute stories. They're not cute stories. We'll see that today. We read the Bible not because it's great history to know. We read the Bible because these are the words that God comes to speak to us here and now, today. And so what God says today is no one should lose their life in the name of protecting the powers that be. No one. And so what do we do, right? What do we do in the face of a power that feels like it can dominate and it feels so powerless to just wait and wonder? And what we're really asking is, what does courage look like in a relationship? What does courage look like to take the next right step? And so when it feels powerless, what Jonathan's example will tell us today is that it is sacrificial love and faithfulness that carries us through. And so we're going to just kind of jump in and out of some passages where David and Jonathan interact with each other. And I want to draw out this sacrificial love and faithfulness to encourage us to lean into that love together. What we see is that David becomes more and more popular. As David comes back from battle immediately after the passage I started with, the women start to sing for David. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And that song went over with King Saul about as well as you think it would. And so Saul, out of jealousy, starts to try to kill David. He tries to kill him directly by throwing a spear at him. That communicates how you really feel, right? Then he tries to humiliate him. So he gives him one of his daughters, but at the last moment switches and says, actually, I'm giving that daughter to somebody else to try and humiliate David. And then when David is still successful, he says, okay, I'll give you another of my daughter, but I don't know how you're going to pay the dowry, right? This ancient kind of price that someone would pay to marry a woman. And David's like, yeah, I'm poor. I don't have access to the funds that I would need to marry the daughter of a king. And so Saul says, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. Instead of money, why don't you go out and circumcise 100 Philistines and bring me back the foreskins? You can throw up now if you want to. It's a terrible story, right? And the Bible's even like, yeah, Saul figured David would die trying to do this. David goes out with a group of people and brings back 200, which, wow. But there's that indirect trying to kill David, right? Trying to humiliate him, trying to lessen him any way possible. And then Jonathan enters back into the story. And so it says, you'll see it on the screen, in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. It says, Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. Right, he's trying to pass it off now. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. You see the love there. Right? His dad, the king, is ordering him to kill his friend. And what a kind of morally terrible place to be in, because it's not brought out in the passage, but imagine how that must have felt. To wonder if your life would be at risk for not obeying this order. And Jonathan holds out a lot of hope here and says, I will talk to my father. In fact, after that passage, he does talk to his father and say, basically, why are you trying to kill David? You know how much he loves you. You know all that he's doing for us. And Saul listens to him, actually. Says, you're right. Bring David back. Jonathan calls out to David, brings him back. But what friendship to risk going to his father, the king, and saying, why are you doing this? What a challenge. What a boldness, right? And it results in a peaceful time. It doesn't last long because David becomes even more popular, has even more success as commander of the army. Saul gets even more jealous. And so he tries to kill him with a spear again. And so David just starts hiding out. God protects him and keeps Saul from finding him. Some strange stories. But God is watching over David. And so David comes to Jonathan to plead. He says in chapter 20, what have I done? What is my guilt? What is my sin against your father that he's trying to take my life? Jonathan says back to David, far from it, you will not die. My father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. Why should my father hide this from me? Never. Right? And David is wise. And so he says, no, he's hiding it from you because he knows how sad you'll be. And then 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 4, this is Jonathan's response to David's plea. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. I don't know if you've ever been there. Either that you were the desperate one, or that you were somebody trying to help somebody who is desperate, whether because of grief, because of the circumstances of their life, but something causes them to have no hope. And I imagine having been in those moments and trying to be present in those moments, what a gift. What a gift for Jonathan to have just said, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. In fact, I think Jonathan was David's hope in that moment. The only thing that David could hold on to was that he still had a friend who was standing for him, who didn't give in to power, who didn't do the easy thing and say, well, good luck, David. Hope it all goes well for you. Let me know if you need anything. But he comes to him and he says, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. That's what love says. That's what love says in a sacrifice. Because remember, Jonathan is the king's son. It's an important thing to remember. He is on the track to become the next king. All that's got to happen is his dad's got to die. And he would be king. But Jonathan was a good man. And he knew it was right. He recognized what God was doing in David's life. And so he set aside his rights and said, I don't have to be king. I won't stand in the way of what God is doing, even at cost to myself. Even at a great cost to myself. He sets aside his rights for love. And this is the faithfulness that we talk about. This is the friendship and the sacrificial love that defines David and Jonathan. It's love in action that says, I'll do it for you. What a commitment to one person. What a commitment. I'll do it for you. And so Jonathan would speak to his father, King Saul. Didn't go over super well. Before Jonathan goes, he makes this plan with David that like, hey, I'll go and talk to my father. That's what David asked him to do. If I get a read that Saul's going to kill you, I'll come out to this field that they plan to meet at. You be hiding way far away. If Saul wants to kill you, I'll shoot my arrows way far from the target. And I'll call out to the boy attending who would collect the arrows, the arrows are way far beyond you. And that would mean Saul's trying to kill David, and David needs to hide. But Jonathan says, if I can talk to my dad, if I can talk to the king, and his heart is for you, then I'll shoot closer to the target. And if I say the arrows are on this side of you, then you can come back home. And so Jonathan speaks to his father, the king. Verses 32 and 33, it says, as Jonathan confronts him, Saul gets angry at Jonathan and says like, well, here, I'll just read it. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse, David, to your own shame, to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring David to me, for he will surely die. Right? Saul's calling it out, right? Like, this is your shame. You could be king, and you're giving it up for the sake of David? This is your shame. And yet what we recognize as we read the passage is it's not. The very thing that should cause shame is actually a great honor for Jonathan. That he is faithful and he loves his friend. And so Jonathan answers Saul and says, "Why should David be put to death? What has he done?" But Saul threw his spear at Jonathan to strike him. So Jonathan knew it was the decision of his father to put David to death. Jonathan gets attacked and threatened now, standing up for the wrong person in the eyes of King Saul, taking a stand for the outcast. Jonathan becomes threatened himself. I love the way John Chrysostom put this. He said, "See how Jonathan risked his life for his friend, how he spoke well of him to his father, not fearing for himself, but caring only for his friend's safety." Amen. Faithfulness, sacrificial love, boldness. This is true faithfulness, to love another. And this is the heart of God. David's called the man after God's own heart. We look for God's heart in these stories. This is the heart of God. This is what God's heart calls us to do, to protect the one who is the outcast, to protect the one on the margins, to protect the one with no power, and to protect them against the ones with power, the ones who manipulate, the ones who seek to kill and destroy and dominate. It's a call to be willing to lay down our lives for our friends. Now notice it only took one person. See, we wouldn't be telling the story of David today if it weren't for Jonathan. For the love that he showed, the risk that he took to save his friend. This kind of love reminds me of Corrie ten Boom's Hiding Place, where she, as a part of a Christian family, hid Jews from the Nazis underneath the table in their dining room in a secret compartment. It was at great risk to themselves. In fact, they all wound up going to concentration camps, and most of her family died there. But for the sake of loving another sacrificially, for the sake of following Jesus in love, they gave themselves. Elie Wiesel, who suffered in a concentration camp himself and wrote Night, he says, "We have learned that when people suffer, we cannot remain indifferent. We have learned that when people suffer, we cannot remain indifferent. It is our calling from God to love our enemy, to welcome the outcast, to show mercy, to take a risk, to sacrifice for love." Jonathan will take a great risk next to see David in hiding. They had their plan for Jonathan to come out and shoot his arrows. He had to be very careful. And so this attendant who's with him, this boy, Jonathan shoots the arrows far beyond and says, "Look, the arrows are beyond you." So the boy runs and collects the arrows, and Jonathan sends him away. Verse 39 says, "The boy knew nothing, only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, 'Go carry them to the city.'" And then in verse 41, it says this: "After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. See, their tears communicate the great love that they shared for each other. They were friends. Their souls were bound to each other, it says. They were friends. If it were up to them, they would have stayed friends through their whole lives. They would have woken up in the palace together, gotten into a little bit of trouble maybe, nothing too serious, pranked a couple people, gone hunting, and gone on with their lives. Political realities kept them from being able to be together as friends. They just wanted to be friends. And a ruler who ruled by indiscriminate power and jealousy and anger robbed them of their friendship. And so they wept. They wept. They cried together. They thought it was the last time they'd ever see each other. But they would see each other one more time. 1 Samuel 23, David is hiding out from Saul now. And it tells us this in verse 16. Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh. What a time to need encouragement. Hiding out as an outlaw. And Jonathan comes to him. Again, you think of the risk involved. Jonathan comes to him to encourage him and says, I will be second to you. Second to you. Again, all he really had to do now was let David get captured. And Jonathan is on the line to be the next king. But not clutching onto his own power, not clutching onto his own rights, he goes to his friend to encourage him and say, look, everybody knows it. You're going to be the king. Don't stop now. In fact, I know it. I'm going to be together right there with you, right-hand man to you. You're going to be king. See, Jonathan was willing to take the lower place for the sake of love. Because love is such a foundational virtue for us. God is love. And love for us, love conquers pride. Love conquers the powers that be. Love conquers their falsehoods and lies. Love conquers their methods. Because love is more real than any political reality going on at any time in any place. And that's God's own heart for us today, is that we access that sacrificial love for the sake of friendship. That we find the heart that grieves for those in need. We find that heart that protects the outcast. We find that heart that humbles itself before friends. Because ultimately it's a heart that grieves what is not. And a heart that grieves what does not come to be that we hope. Because when Jonathan ultimately dies in battle alongside his father, King Saul, David will weep again. Hear what he says about his friend in his lament. This is 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 25 through 27. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. You can hear the longing there for the weapons of war to perish. The heart that's broken open for a friend who was lost to senseless violence. And we grieve today. We grieve because our death toll is growing of those who have died not in battle but living their lives. Those who have died for senseless violence. See, God's heart in David's story with Jonathan is a heart that grieves the senseless deaths. God's heart is a heart that sacrifices out of love. God's heart is a heart that becomes friends. And this is David's heart. In our story and in our world today, Marianne Booty says, I know deep in my bones that the most important ways courage is learned, practiced, and passed along doesn't necessarily make headlines and news cycles. A sermon or a speech is not consequential on its own. It is only decisive to the extent it is linked to lives of integrity, faithfulness, and sacrificial love, and part of communities and movements that are dedicated to higher purpose. And band, you can come on up. And so we ask ourselves, engaging David's life, how can we live lives of integrity in a world where power threatens? How can we hold to our integrity in a world where we feel powerless much of the time? And so we hold to God's heart as it's revealed in David, as it's revealed in Jonathan. A heart that sacrifices for the sake of love. A heart that sacrifices for love of friends. A heart that finds the one person that I can care for. The one person I can say, whatever you need me to do, I'll do for you. See, we each have the opportunity to be that one person. The person who risks, the person who sacrifices for the sake of love. For that one other person, we can stand in love. And it's because of the table that we'll come to in a moment, and because of the one who invites us to this table. Because see, like David and Jonathan's friendship, we have a friend. And we have a friend who is the son of the king. Actually, the son of the King of Kings. And he said, I'm not holding on to my right. He gave himself for us, for each one, so that we would be alive in him. He is the one who set aside all of his rights to come and be our friends. He says to us in the Gospel of John, I have called you friends. He has come to be faithful to us, to love us sacrificially. And so that friend is Jesus, who invites us to his table today. He says, I've called you friends, and he has laid down his life for us friends. May we follow him. If you will, please stand, and we'll share prayers for our people.